Bueno, bienvenidos a Ciencia Compartida. Hoy es nuestra charla 143 y hoy tenemos a David Dye con la colaboración de Alianza por los Turnos de Canarias y nos va a hablar sobre el shark feeding y sobre su nuevo documental Of Shark and Man. Les dejo con él.
Muchas gracias, Eugenio, muchas gracias a todos y también nuestros agradecimientos a la Universidad, a la Facultad de Ciencias del Mar, una vez más por recibirnos aquí y por permitir traer nuestro invitado David Dye. David Dye es el realizador de una peli de un film que hemos presentado en estreno mundial el fin de semana pasado en la muestra de cine submarino de Agüimes, y es un honor para nosotros poder tener David Dye en Canarias presentando en estreno mundial su más reciente film, y por eso traerlo aquí a la Universidad de Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, a la Facultad de Ciencias del Mar, es de hecho un punto que no queremos dejar pasar y no queremos dejar de agradecer muchísimo a todo el equipo. Eugenio, muchas gracias y vamos a pasar. Yo paso inmediatamente la palabra a David Dye. David Dye, welcome to Las Palmas University and to Ciencias del Mar.
Thank you for having me. So, do you want me to introduce?
Please,
okay.
You can start by introducing yourself.
Okay. My name is David Dye. I'm from the UK. My Spanish, muy español es de mal. So I'll speak in English if that's okay. If you have any questions, by all means, I'm going to have a period at the end of the talk where you can ask me anything you like, so it's no problem. I'm a filmmaker, a professional filmmaker, and I specialise in films about sharks in particular, and also the conservation of marine life and marine ecosystems. And I want to, well, I've been invited to speak to you today, and what I wanted to talk about was, first of all, the story of Shark Reef in Fiji, which I don't know if any of you have ever heard of, and how shark feeding, humans feeding sharks, has enabled long-term conservation initiatives and also benefited local communities in a developing nation.
Would you like to translate some? I don't know if necessary. Would you like to have any ¿Os gustaría de tener alguna traducción para español de lo que ha sido dicho?
Se entiende perfectamente, ¿no?
Sí, podemos seguir en inglés entonces. Vale, muchas gracias.
Your English is obviously much better than my Spanish. First of all, did that trailer make sense to you? Can you get an idea of the film? The film itself is about three different stories. The first story being the idea that if there's something that you want to do in your life which you're not doing, so maybe you have dreams or ambitions of things, you just decide one day that you're going to forget everything else and you're just going to focus on trying to achieve that goal. That's one story. The other story is about getting as close as possible to the world's biggest bull sharks, the Tiburon Toro. And the third story, which is what I'm going to speak to you about more today, is the story of Shark Reef in Fiji. Shark Reef is situated off the southern coast of Fiji, off the main island of Fiji, which is called Vitilevu, in something called the Benga Channel. So you have, on one side you have a small island called Benga, and across the channel you have a village called Noloa. And in Fiji, various reefs and sections of water of the sea, they're owned by the villages. So traditionally they've always been owned by the village. So if you were one village, you would own your own reef, and that was where you would go and you would fish, you would spend most of your time on that reef, and you'd get most of your protein and food from that reef. Shark Reef, unfortunately, over a period of years, had been decimated by industrial fishing. So industrial fleets, the big boats from Taiwan, from China, from Spain, from various parts of the EU, had over decades, had gone through Shark Reef and fished it completely dead. So no life. So no fish, no smaller fish, so no bigger fish, no soft coral, just muerte, completely dead. In 1999, a South African diver by the name of Brandon Page was travelling around the world trying to find new spots, places where he could go and find sharks. And he saw a reef in Fiji called Shark Reef. He assumed automatically that it would be full of sharks. So when he went there and saw that there was not only no sharks, but no fish, no coral, he was very surprised by that. So he asked the local village, the villagers of Naloa, they're the ones who own Shark Reef, if he could try and attract sharks to the area to see if any would turn up. So they gave him the permission to do that. They had nothing to lose, there's nothing on the reef, so they said that he could do that. And over a period of around about 2.5 years, every day he would dive on Shark Reef and take fish scraps down, and for the first couple of months, nada, nothing turned up. And then periodically, a short time later, there would be maybe a grey reef shark would pass by and would feed for a bit and then disappear. And this continued over two or 3 years, when all of a sudden more sharks would come into Shark Reef. And those sharks brought with them smaller fish as well. So the sharks would feed on the fish heads that the divers were giving to them, and that would leave smaller bits of fish, so the other smaller fish would eat those. The bodily waste, so when sharks would pass, I don't know what the Spanish is, but the bodily waste through would feed even smaller fish. And then over a period of years, the life returned back to Shark Reef. So the sharks had actually brought life back onto the reef with them. By 2003, a man called Mike Newman arrived. Mike Newman was previously he was the head, a very important man at Deutsche Bank. So he retired from his job and wanted to go into marine conservation. He's been diving for decades and decades with Ron and Valerie Taylor and Stan Waterman and people like that. And he wanted to set up a conservation project in the South Pacific. And he found this reef and realised that there were sharks there. And he thought what he could do would be to run a dive for tourists to dive with the sharks, where they would hand feed the sharks. And he could use that to then raise money to fund conservation in the area to protect this reef, because he knew that it had been previously fished to death, and then now the life had come back, they wanted to protect that and keep that and stop it being fished out again. So he set up a company called Benga Adventure Divers. The idea was to make a long-lasting conservation project. So something that would go on for years and years and years and years, and would maintain protection for resident shark species, so the reef sharks, and also temporary respite, temporary relief from fishing for more migratory and transient species. So tigers, bulls, who don't live on the reef all year, but it gives them, when they're on the reef, they have some level of protection. So he set up Benga Adventure Divers. On the original, the first dives, they would have a few species. The main species were the bull sharks, and they would have, on average, maybe 3 to 5 bull sharks would arrive on the feeds, and they were delighted with this, because it's not many parts of the world where you can see multiple bull sharks where they will stay for a period of time. As the life on the reef began to flourish more, it went from having no species of fish to now there are 500 species of fish, which grow very, very large because the fishing fleets don't get chance to take out the larger individuals, so they can live longer and grow bigger. And as that happened, even more sharks would come in. So now, on that dive, you have 8 species of shark. You have grey reef shark, which live on the reef. You have black tip reef sharks and white tip reef sharks. All of these, they live on the reef year round for the most part. You have the tawny nurse shark. You also have sickle fin lemon sharks, which if you've seen lemon sharks in videos on YouTube from the Bahamas, the sickle fin lemon shark is the sister species in the Indo-Pacific. So it's a lemon shark, but slightly different. Silver tip sharks, tiger sharks. One tiger shark that visits Shark Reef is almost 6 meters in length. They call that shark Scarface. So everybody, when they go there, everybody wants to see Scarface. And of course, the bull sharks as well. And now, currently in 2015, they've gone from having 3 or 5 bull sharks on a feed to now having up to 100 on one dive. So 100 bull sharks in one area on one dive. In 2004, they established the Shark Reef Marine Reserve, meaning that on the area of Shark Reef, pescado é prohibida, no fishing, nothing at all. Even the villagers would not go and fish on Shark Reef. And what they found from this was that because there was protection of the fish species on the reef, outside the reef, where they could actually still fish, they began catching more fish. Because the fish, there were so many of them, because they weren't all in one place, they would move outside of it. The fishermen caught more fish and so made more money. So life for them was even easier. In 2006, they extended the protection to include something called the Fiji Shark Corridor, which is the stretch of water between Benga Island and Benga Lagoon and the southern coast of Viti Levu as well. So the protection became wider. Now, this was all achieved because of shark feeding. And a lot of people in the world think shark feeding is a bad thing to do, is a negative thing to do. The main reason for shark feeding is it guarantees sharks. So if you have a business that you want to maintain and keep going for a long time, you need to guarantee your customers, your divers, that there are going to be sharks on those dives, which means feeding the sharks. And when you maintain that business for a long period of time, it means that the conservation project, the protection of the reef, can continue. They do 5 dives on Shark Reef, one at 30 meters, one at 25 meters, one at 15 meters, and that's the bulls and the tigers, sickle fin lemon, the silver tip, and the tawny nurse sharks. They're the sharks that would be on this dive. And they do one at 10 meters and one at 4 meters for the reef sharks as well. So if you're divers, you get to do a safety stop surrounded by sharks everywhere. It's fantastic. They feed 5 times a week, so 5 days of the 7 they will do a feed, and they give the sharks 2 rest days. On those rest days, the sharks, the bull sharks, they move away and go and do other things. So you may find 5 bull sharks on Shark Reef where there is no feeding, and then the following day when they go to feed, there may be 100. So Many people think that if you feed sharks in one area, that it will aggregate. It will mean lots of sharks will live in that area, so divers then can't dive there anymore. That's not the case. The sharks will move away, and then they will come back for the feed. They also, if you've seen on TV, or if you've done a shark feed yourself, you may see that a lot of feeds they suspend, like the fish, chumsicle, the frozen fish, and the sharks eat from there, or they use a pole where they will spear a fish and then hold it, and the sharks take it from that. In Fiji, they hand feed. So it's tuna heads, so the atun, so the tuna heads, and they will have a box or a big bin. So when they feed the sharks, it's by hand. The sharks will come in, and like a matador, they will, like this, and lead the shark away from the body, so the shark takes the food from the hand of the feeder. And they do that for safety reasons, because what that does is the sharks have learned that it's one piece of food for one shark. So the sharks know that they will take it in turns to feed. So there's one shark will come in, and they do it like this because they've trained the shark to come from the left. So the shark comes from the feeder's left hand side and passes round and eats the food and swims away that way. Behind you have the clients, the divers watching, and that means that they can control where the shark goes, so the shark never passes over, and to the clients it always stays in front of the clients. So it's for safety for the clients, safety for the feeder, because they're very gentle. The sharks are very gentle. They know the difference between the food and the hand. They just know. There is a clip in the film where you see a shark go towards the feeder who doesn't have the food, and the feeder goes like this, shows the shark he has no food, and the shark immediately turns away, gently. There's no aggression or anything like that. It's also safer for the shark as well, because if you suspend frozen fish in chains and it's weighted down, it can damage the shark's mouth when they're eating that, when they're trying to bite it. If you feed with a pole, because of the pointed end of the pole, it can damage inside the shark's mouth or damage their eyes if they miss, which they do sometimes miss. So hand feeding is safer for everyone. Part of the benefit of this feed is that the people who feed the sharks, it's not Americans, it's not English people or Spanish people or French people. They only employ Fijians. So from the village who owns the reef, from when they're younger, they say to the kids, if you want to be a shark feeder, you come and ask us, and they will train the youngsters, first of all, of course, how to dive, and they will take them through up to dive master minimum. This is all free of charge. This is part of the job. The youngsters do not pay for that. They employ them. They give them a long-term career, which means more money coming into the village, because Fijian villages are, it's the third world. Do you understand? The developing nation, it's very, very poor. The weather, if there's hurricanes or cyclones, villages, everything gone, they have to start again. So what this does is it gives these kids a future, and it gives them a long-term career where they, the men in the family, usually the oldest son or the father, he will work and provide money for the whole family. So particularly if he has sisters or daughters, they want sisters and daughters to go to school and become educated. So the shark feeding jobs, these careers, pay for them to go through school. It puts food on the table. It means that they can afford to buy things to help them live a better standard of life. And the senior feeders, the two main and most experienced feeders, at Bengal Adventure Divers earn more in a year than a lecturer at a university. So they get paid very, very well for Fiji. And this, again, creates sustainability. It's a long-term thing which can continue to go because it makes money. And the operation, the Shark Dive, Bengal Adventure Divers, turns over $1 million Fijian dollars per year. The owner, Mike, who owns Bengal Adventure Divers, he has never ever taken one single penny of that. Every penny goes to the staff, or goes back to the villagers, or goes into the conservation project. So it's a business which turns a lot of profit, but doesn't make the owners any profit. They take no money whatsoever. Because of the money, also when you go to dive, you pay, of course, for your air, you pay for the experience, you pay for the feeder. You also pay a levy, like a tax, and that tax goes directly to the village. And since the shark feed has been established in 2003, that small village has made almost $200,000 purely from the shark feed alone. So it's built a village hall where they all get together and have events and weddings and things like that. It's built them a church where they can have a place of worship. It's built houses if people are sick or they have problems in their life. It helps solve those problems, and it helps with health, etc. and education. So they have, for a small village in hand-built wooden houses, they actually have quite a strong infrastructure for fishing, for growing food, for everything. And this is all because of the shark feed. Also, the protection of the reef means that the sharks will always be there. And when the sharks are always there, it means that the shark feed will always be there. And if the shark feed is always there, there's always jobs. And now they're seeing that fathers are now passing on the tradition of being shark feeders to their sons. So their sons are now taking over and becoming shark feeders themselves. Because in Fiji, the shark is seen as a god. On two islands, they see the shark as a spirit god. As a country, and as a culture, and as a society, it's very, very young. They were still eating each other, cannibals, just over 100 years ago. So their growth has been muy rapido, very, very, very fast. And that came from missionaries. So the Christian missionaries would go over. For the first few years, the Fijians would eat the missionaries. And then after a few years of eating missionaries, they sent enough to convince them that Christianity was the one religion, and they convinced them that their spirit gods, of which there are sharks and horses and sea snakes, they convinced them that the animal spirit gods had also converted to Christianity as well. So religion is very strong, but they have a very, very strong link with sharks, so it's a very cultural thing. A few years ago, I was involved to a small degree they tried to make Fiji, the whole of Fiji, a shark sanctuary, and it got very, very close, very, very close to saying yes, but unfortunately it failed in the last minute. So in Fiji there are marine protected areas, marine reserves, small reserves where these fish and sharks and coral and everything flourishes, but it's still not full protection. So there is still shark fishing and shark finning in Fijian waters. So what Shark Reef proves is that in order to sustain a large amount of large predatory animals, you need to have an abundancy of life from the very, very small to the very, very big. And when you leave them alone, they will regulate each other. So the sharks the local sharks, like the black-tip reef shark in particular, they control the population of the reef octopus. When the sharks were fished out and disappeared years ago, the reef octopus went loco crazy everywhere, and just that was one of the reasons why the reef was destroyed, because nothing was eating the reef octopus. So it's an incredible story of conservation from ordinary people, a grassroots community people who got together with a goal and achieved the goal. So it's a story not many people know. There is also one other story from there which you might be interested in, is if you know remora, the suckerfish, which ride around on sharks. Because there's so many sharks there, there's loads and loads and loads of remora. There's also lots of giant trevally, which have grown very, very big. And what we discovered was that when the sharks would come in to feed, the giant trevally have realised that because there's so many remora, that they can eat the remora. So they will have a shark come in to feed from this side, and a giant trevally will come from this side and chase a remora over to the other side of the shark, where another giant trevally is waiting to eat the remora. And it's quick, it's like that. We didn't know that this was happening until we saw it on camera. You just don't see it. So one trevally had given it a go, had thought, I might try eating one of these remora, and then he was successful. So all the other remora saw this and thought, oh, I'll try that. So now all the remora there, they eat the medium-sized, all the trevally eat the medium-sized remora. So it's changed behaviour slightly, but everybody is benefiting. Not so much some of the remora, perhaps. But that's a brief overview of that story and how shark feeding has been involved in that story. Shark feeding is a big topic, which some people think it's very, very bad. Some people think it's very, very good. Some people, like me, in the middle, think when it's good, if it's done right, it's good. If it's done badly, it's bad. And what I don't want to do, be in English, is sit here and just talk at you for an hour. So has anyone got any questions, either about Shark Reef, the shark dive, or shark feeding, anything in particular that you've maybe heard or read that you want to talk about or ask a question about?
I wanted to ask, in relation, all that you've said sounds very calibrated and social-wise is quite accurate and very well developed. But I was wondering if how can we really know that the ecosystem is not very artificialized? You know, how do we know that our impact is not significant for them right now? How do we know that those sharks aren't learning a pattern to go and feed there, and the moment we may go out of there or maybe stop existing for any reason, they can recover their own activity?
That's a really good question. In the film itself, there's a long section about shark feeding and the controversy, and that's one of the points raised. What they also do as part of the shark feed is there is always one diver who notes down the sharks that are there. So when a shark comes in, they will give that shark a name. So here comes the shark, we'll call him Jaws. You've never seen him before, and he'll have markings and patterns on his body where they can identify it. They have one diver who is looking around and making a note of the sharks. Over the past 8 years, they have built a database of individuals who have visited Shark Reef. Predominantly the bull sharks, because the bull sharks are the main species on that dive that come in such large numbers. So they look at the data all the time and regulate that data to see if they have had any impact on the shark's normal life history. And what they have found is that it hasn't. There's been Sometimes some sharks will come once and then we'll never see them ever again. Some sharks will come and stay for 2 or 3 days and then disappear, and then maybe come back 6 months later. Some sharks will stay for 2 weeks and come back maybe 3 years later. So what they also know is that they've never ever seen bull sharks feeding naturally, predatory on the reef. Ever. They've never ever ever seen it. So in a strange way, these sharks that have brought the life back to the reef, because they've not become resident or local, they don't spend all their lives there, the fish species which do are not affected by the large numbers of big bull sharks or the other species of large predatory sharks, because they were very concerned that that might be the case. And what we found is that these sharks will pass through, and if there's 100 sharks on the feed, maybe only 5 will actually feed from the feeder. A lot of times they will come in and decide, I'm not interested, and decide that they don't want to feed. So the feeder will hold the food out, shark will come in and think, I don't want that. Another aspect is they feed them tuna heads. And tuna heads are so low in calories, because it's predominantly bone, that when they feed, it doesn't affect their appetite. So they don't go do the shark feed and then they're full all day and then they don't eat their normal prey. So with the data, and they also they have scientists and researchers, outside scientists and researchers who show no bias, so they don't say something because they're their friends. Does that make sense? Yeah. So they'll invite external researchers in and say, please come and do a research project on these sharks. You're welcome to come, and then please give us the findings, and if we feel from the findings that we are having an impact which is negative, we will change our procedures and change how we do it. And they have done that over the course of 8-9 years. They have adapted to what scientists have said as well. So it's a conservation project, but a base for researchers, scientists to go and study all the species of shark, or maybe one species. When I was there was a research scientist studying the grey reef sharks at the top. So it continuously evolves the actual the procedures of what they do to ensure they don't have a negative impact on the sharks. So humans have impacted the reef without any question. They have impacted the reef in a positive way. They do condition the sharks as well. The sharks are conditioned to behave in a certain way, and that's for the safety of the customers, the divers and the feeders. But what they found is that those conditioned sharks, they only exhibit that behaviour on the shark feed. When the feed stops and the box closes and everybody goes, they go back to behaving normally. They're very, very intelligent. They will see very quickly if you don't have food, and some people, if you've seen the film, I know Jane has seen the film, the sharks come in very, very, very close in parts of the film. But they know that you do not have food, so they don't try and chase your hand, for example. So yes, the sharks are conditioned. Yes, there's been a human impact, but so far it's not been perceived to be a negative impact. Does that answer the question?
But then I was wondering if really we are not like altering their behavior as much, or maybe even they are not as interested, because I'm surprised to hear that they are not as interested for the food, and that the food that you're giving is not really that nutritional for them. Yeah. So why would they be attracted to go to the shark reef? You understand? Because
absolutely, yeah. Again,
maybe it could be safety, or I don't know. Why would they go there if they are not going to really feed on the tuna heads? They are not going to feed on the fish that are there, and they're not gonna, or maybe it's the interaction between them. What attracts them? Really?
Well, that's another really good question, and from what I could tell, I did that dive 52 times, and from what I could tell, it probably is social. That you will find maybe some sharks that know what's going on there. They've been there before in the past, and then they're swimming around, and the other bull sharks are around, and then where's he going, or where's she going, let's follow them. And then they'll come in, and it's almost the way that the feed is structured. Hopefully this makes sense. You have here will be the clients and the divers, here will be the feeder, and then the reef finishes here and goes into a very steep, deep drop-off, and they come from there. And it's like, have you ever seen the film Zulu with Michael Caine? No? Okay, I'll try another example. When you see the films about the war, World War II, you see the planes appearing from nowhere, and there's hundreds of planes and they're all coming together. It's like that when they come in. You see them coming in towards it. So there's definitely a social aspect. Some of the sharks are quite shy, quite cautious and quite timid. Some of the sharks are a bit bolder, a bit more confident. Some of the sharks are very, very confident and very bold. And other sharks have, you may say, maybe a slightly bad attitude, in that they are more difficult for the feeders to, when those sharks arrive, the feeders know they need to be extra careful. So the behaviour varies a lot. What we also see is that towards late October, late November, the bull sharks disappear for 2 months, and they go to mate. So they don't come and feed at all, they go to mate. You will get 1 or 2 perhaps during that dive, but then when the sharks do return, it's interesting for the researchers because the females come back with obviously the mating scars. So they know, the named sharks that they recognise, they know that when she comes back again over the course of the following months, that she's probably pregnant. And so they see the gestation period of how the female sharks get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they will also see smaller sharks coming as well. So they see the life history of individual sharks unfolding in front of them. And other sharks, they see once or twice and then never again. So it provides them, it's probably a social thing. It's almost like we as people, if something is happening over here and there's a commotion, we will think what's going on and then go and have a look. Probably quite similar with the sharks. Also perhaps maybe because it's protected, because they've learned that they don't have people trying to kill them and fish them, maybe they return back there for relief from that because they know it might be a safer environment. Maybe, we don't know for sure, but it certainly seems to be that they do seem to enjoy being there. It's curiosity, I think, more than anything.
Do you think that this maybe is happening somewhere else and we are not seeing it? Maybe the reef before we were there was some kind of like this, but we don't see it. You know, maybe sharks behave, they form places, like they ritualize places, but it's like a sort of chance that we are in a place that was frequently visited by sharks, and we try to rehabilitate it, and they sort of start the pattern again. But
I think I understand. So they used to go there, and then the reef died, so they went somewhere else, so and then the reef's back again, so they go back to the reef. Very, very possible. Very possible. The sharks, when they leave Shark Reef, we don't know where they go. They're probably Fijian, sharks. They are certainly Fijian sharks. So they will travel around the Fijian Islands as part of their normal life history, part of what they do generally. And it may well be that now part of their routine for a lot of those sharks is to go back to Shark Reef, to hang out with other sharks, maybe to go and have a snack, to go see what's going on. It's interesting, it's a different part of their life, their day for them. Life for a shark can be very boring, I imagine, sometimes, just swimming around and not much happens. So then when they get an opportunity to see something, there may be a curiosity. So those sharks may well have visited Shark Reef previously, because there are some big, very mature, very old, probably 20-year-old individuals that do go there. So that's very possible, is likely as well. But for the youngsters, for the smaller sharks, for a lot of them, they will visit Shark Reef for the first time as youngsters and maybe remember, and then they will have their life history where they will always go back until they get eaten by another bull shark or a tiger shark, which happens, or they're caught by fishermen or something like that. So it certainly plays, the location plays a role in their life history. The other thing is those sharks behave in that way on Shark Reef. They will not behave the same way on another reef. They alter their behaviour. It's location specific. So they've been conditioned to behave in a certain way for 40 minutes, 5 days a week in one place. And what we found is that conditioning, it's a temporary, it's like a memory. Maybe you go to watch a football match every Saturday, maybe, or every other Saturday. You may behave a certain way at a football match that you wouldn't behave in a supermarket, perhaps. Does that make sense? So your behaviour pattern means that when you're in the football stadium, the Bernabeu, the Nou Camp, when you go to the football stadium, you behave in a certain way. Maybe you swear more curse words and you shout at people, but you don't do that anywhere else. It's a similar principle, I think. Hopefully, does that make sense? Okay, please tell me if I'm not making any sense. I'll try and explain a bit better. Or bring Fernando.
Thank you.
Don't you think it would be interesting to tag some of those sharks to see where they go when they leave the shark reef?
I think they would be really interested in the results. They would love to do that in the results, and I would be fascinated. But they don't want to put tags in their sharks. I think for them, whereas the results would be very interesting, I don't think they like the idea of putting satellite tags into the sharks. They don't really like the idea of these sharks swimming around with tags in them. And because the researchers are often external researchers, it wouldn't be their own research. So they like the sharks to come and enjoy being sharks without having people sticking things in them. So they'd like the results, but I don't think they'll ever do it. But it would be fascinating. It would be really interesting. But at the same time, similarly, I kind of like that I don't know. I think mystique, mystery, is a good thing.
I don't know if you saw the film.
Yeah.
Yeah. After seeing the film of David Dyer, we got this impression that it's a pity if we are gonna tag those sharks. They are so in their natural environment. You know, it's really a pity. If we tag a pelagic shark, a blue shark in high sea, that's different. We only see that shark once. But these sharks, they have names. They've
named over 200 species. So
So it's difficult. It's like a friend for them.
It is
They
very
have
much like a
200 friends.
it's very much like a friend relationship. So they have 200 individuals who the guy whose job it is to note them down, he starts seeing them as his personal friends. And when some of those sharks they disappear for a bit, he's doing every dive, looking, hoping that they come back. And then when they come back, it's, oh great, we haven't seen you for 3 years, and then you're back there. They're genuinely happy about it because they patrol the reef as well, so they don't just say it's protected because it says so on a piece of paper. They go out and they make sure that nobody is fishing there. And Fijians are from a warrior culture, so Fijian men particularly, they're very big, and if they found people fishing on Shark Reef, they would seriously. So people just know, don't go and fish at Shark Reef. So they love these sharks, and to have the sharks swimming around, they don't want the sharks to in any way see the impact of visiting Shark Reef as being negative. Putting a tag in a bull shark isn't going to hurt the bull shark. It's not going to. It takes a lot to hurt a bull shark. You can't really hurt them. If you could, to avoid them looking different, internal tags, but that means catching them, which is not a good idea. And trying to do something like that to a bull shark is not a good idea either as well. So the results would be great, but I think they also like the mystery. They like the mystery. I like the mystery as well. I think it's good.
We like the mystery.
I'd like to ask you a question. My friend said before, the other question I forgot, but have you ever noticed if the younger shark are learning this pattern or this behavior of feeding?
The younger sharks. The younger sharks do generally learn. It's almost a hierarchy. With most predatory shark species, when a bigger shark comes by, the smaller sharks will they will allow the bigger shark to feed. To feed first. The difference is that the smaller sharks often, because they need to learn that, these sharks come in and they're aggressive and they're fast and they're more competitive. And what it takes for those smaller sharks is the bigger shark to make sure that smaller shark learns the lesson to give way to the bigger shark. A big shark can only become a big shark if it's smart enough to learn how not to annoy or to make the bigger sharks angry. So they do learn, and often they will stay at the back of the feed watching what's happening. Sometimes they come in to feed, other times they don't, but they've noticed that the smaller sharks, over maybe 1 or 2 years that they've recognised, they have never fed in the first 2 or 3 years, all of a sudden when they come back a bit bigger, they start to feed on the feed. So they've been taking the information in, they store it in their brain, and then when they come back, when they feel more confident, they start to feed.
You are not considering a risk, including or teaching this smaller shark to the feeding, to feed it?
From a diver?
From the diver, yeah. I mean, there is in my opinion, a bad way to teach these sharks to obtain the food by the feeder, no in the wild.
There is a lot of people who believe that if you feed a shark, that shark then sees a human, maybe a swimmer or another diver, and
from another diver,
and thinks that diver will give them food. Is that?
Not exactly. I mean, when younger sharks came to that place, to the point where you feed them, I think you're committed a risk, or a risk by changing the behavior of younger sharks.
So natural predatory behaviour. Okay, that's a good question. It's a valid concern. It's something which they did consider, but they found that it doesn't actually affect them. The bull sharks in particular, and tiger sharks, and larger predatory shark species are, innate. You know, it's built in, it's hardwired. That as soon as they come out of the womb, they know what to do. Evolution over millions of years mean that they pop out of mother shark and they're immediately looking at how to feed. Because most predatory sharks are opportunistic feeders, these younger sharks see
when they're born, they know how to feed themselves.
So it's evolution, it's innate. So when the younger sharks, when they find the shark reef and they come along across shark reef, they may feed. Most of them don't, but they may do. But they almost store that information, a small bit of information in their minds, that when they come through the area again, if they want to visit, there can be an easy meal there. But they found that it doesn't condition those sharks to believe that all they need to do to eat is go back to shark reef. Otherwise, those small sharks would become resident, and there are no resident bull sharks on shark reef. There's not one bull shark that lives on shark reef. Not a single one.
What about Scarface?
They've not seen her for a couple of years. So she used to come maybe once a month, twice a month. They have 5 or 6 tiger sharks, which became quite frequent visitors. So maybe one a month, one dive a month or 2 dives a month, a tiger shark would come in. They've not seen Scarface for 2 or 3 years, and that could be for 2 reasons. The first reason is she swam off somewhere and she's been captured and killed, which is possible, very possible. The second reason is when the tiger sharks first came to the feeds and they would first arrive at the feeds, the bull sharks would swim away. And you'd know a tiger was coming because the bull sharks would disappear, and then a bigger animal would come in and start to feed. And then over the years, the bull sharks became more confident, and because of the protection, they became bigger. They were allowed to grow bigger, so that people weren't capturing them before they were able to mature. And over the last few years now, the bull sharks will bully, like pick on, bully, be aggressive towards.
Yes. The bull sharks become more confident.
In Spanish.
Los tiburones se encontraban más confiantes unos con los otros, incluso con las otras especies. Los toros con los tigres.
So
estaban más confortables.
They will bully the tiger sharks away. So because there's so many sharks, bull sharks on shark reef, the tigers now have started coming in less.
Los tigres estaban en minoría, in minority. The tigers.
The
tiger numbers.
Tigers are lone. Tigers are solitary animals. They don't travel in groups. Whereas these bull sharks, because there's so many of them, one tiger swims by, he sees all the bull sharks, or she sees all the bull sharks, and thinks, I'm going to go somewhere else, because the bull sharks are the dominant species on shark reef, without question. So every now and again a tiger turns up, and it's always a big treat when a tiger comes. But the tigers are big, 3, 4, 5 meters.
David, let me just add one thing concerning your question. There's another thing to consider and to think about. There is not shark feeding every week all along the year. You see, sometimes there are 1 month or 2 months of heavy rain, and it's impossible to go out on diving. And
that's very rare. In 365 days of each year, there will be feeding on, I'm trying to do my maths now, 250, 260. 260.
Yeah.
So they have 5 days a week with 2 days off, and the sharks learn when the days off are as well, so they don't come in. But for a dive to be cancelled is very, 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 very rare. So every week they will feed, every single week. When we mentioned in the film about not being able to do the feed, is not being able to go further out to the reef. The feed would still take place. I don't think we missed a day of an actual feed, maybe 1 day, no, maybe 2. That's very, in a cyclone, of course, yeah, no one's going to go out. But generally, in an average year, there will be a lot of feeds 5 days a week. But they're a lot more intelligent than people think. They're so, the English phrase is hardwired, so they know just automatically they're conditioned and they exist. Have you seen the film Jaws? The movie Jaws?
El Tiburón de Spielberg, sí.
When he says, when Hooper says sharks do only 3 things. They swim, they eat little sharks, and they make baby sharks. And that's true, that's all sharks do. So bull sharks, they know that their natural life history, it's not been impacted by the feed, which is a good question, because I would have thought that perhaps maybe myself that it would have been.
I mean, in a little period of time, but if you extended this practice to feed the sharks, perhaps they change their behavior.
In regards to if they did it in other areas as well, as in, so not just one place, but
well, not exactly in the same area. For example,
yeah.
If you extended this feeding, maybe you should change the shark behavior.
It's unlikely, because they don't stay on one location long enough. They, over I think maybe 9 years, they've never ever habituated. Made one shark. If a shark had become habituated, they would be resident. They would live on Shark Reef all year, and it's not happened once. It's quite surprising. It is quite surprising. But in shark feeds around the world, they've found the same thing, that sharks will do their normal thing when they're not feeding. If it's a reef shark, for example, grey reef or white tip reef, black tip reef, they're resident species anyway. So they've still found that when they do feeds in those areas, it's usually the same sharks that appear, but when they've had periods where they've not done the feeds, it hasn't affected those sharks long term. So I maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I would have been of the same opinion. I would have had that concern also, but it doesn't seem to, which is quite surprising.
No, I was also wondering, the Fijian village, the village you were talking about, I understand, I would think that their economy, their way of life before all this shark feeding would be fishing,
yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
So didn't you find like a lot of opposition at the start? You know, even though their shark was their god, I would believe that greed is a human condition. So, you know, the fishermen are like, you know, this animal is kind of competing with me. I really don't share the will to hunt it, but you know, they are less, and I feel that I'm catching more, and I don't have the problems that I have with them. So when you start like introducing the shark feeding, did you find any kind of opposition from the Fijians?
Interesting. Again, a really good question. A small amount, perhaps. Fijians are very different to. We live in Western civilization, so we grow up with TV and 100 channels of television and documentaries and DVDs and videos. We're consistently, all the time, as human beings in the Western civilization, bombarded with information. Even subconsciously, we learn things walking down the street. We hear something we don't realise, and it goes in. Whereas Fijians and people in third world and developing nations, they have a much more simplified life. So like you say, their life cycle is based on farming, it's based on fishing. Of course, a main source of protein is fish. And the reason Fijians own those reefs is it's called Ngoli Goli, which is a fishing ground. So the village of Naloa owns Shark Reef. So the villagers of Naloa would go on the small boat and fish around Shark Reef. But it was sustainable because it's sustainable village fishing. So they would catch sharks sometimes because a shark will feed the whole village. In most Fijian villages, in Naloa, or in Benga, where they worship the shark god, and in Taveuni, where they worship the shark god, they would not catch and kill sharks. In Naloa, they would, sharks just another big fish. So when they wanted to actually establish the shark feed and make it a protected area and say you can't fish there anymore, they didn't have the understanding, the long-term understanding of the benefit that would come with that for a sustainable fishing ground. So they needed to be, and I don't like to say the word educated, like if a white man goes to the third world to educate them, it's incredibly patronising. And it's a big problem with conservation, that third world countries don't protect their own, usually they don't protect their own environments. It's wealthy, usually white-skinned Westerners go and educate the islanders, and it can be a big difficulty whereby it alienates, so it makes the people not want to do something because why are you coming over here and telling me what to do with my reef? What right do you have? So there was a level of education, kind of soft education, and that was delivered through other Fijians. They made sure that this was a Fijian-run project where Fijians delivered the message, Fijians worked on the project, and the Fijians earned the money, all the money from the project. So there was a slight resistance, but when the protection came in and all the fish knew that they could live there and not get fished out, and there's the life on that reef is incredible. It's just fish everywhere, and big fish, because as I said, these fish don't get fished out. So if you imagine the protected area of Shark Reef is like this, all this around it, those fish, there's not a fence, so those fish will swim outside where people are allowed to fish. And since the establishment of Shark Reef, the fishermen are now catching more fish than they've ever caught before. Of course, maybe 100 years ago, before industrial fishing, it was similar. But so everybody, they can still fish there. They only take what the village needs. It's not like our society where you take everything and then throw away what you don't want. There, they take what they need, they feed, and then they'll keep doing this, so it's sustainable. So they've realised very quickly that this is great for them. They make money, they can eat, they can build things, and also because Western culture is has gone there now. You go into Suvan's, Burger King, McDonald's, everything. So they want an iPhone, and they have iPhones. They want Nike trainers. They want the same things in computers and laptops that we want and that we have. And now, because they can earn the money to do that, and they have the infrastructure, they can have that. But they still have the natural connection to the natural world. So does that answer that? Again, another good question. Anybody else?
I am a little curious. No,
honestly, it's quite alright.
This is completely different, okay? I am a little bit curious to know your trajectory. How, or your academic trajectory, how did you end up doing that? Because you know, it's not the traditional path to follow, but
yeah.
it's especially because it's quite risky, you know. So what led you to, you know, maybe not only doing a documentary, but, you know, what did you study to be interested in this? What moved you to do this kind of stuff?
Okay, so my understanding is you guys are students of ocean science, oceanography, marine biology. Okay. I was a musician. I played guitar in a heavy metal band for 10 years. So it's not the same kind of approach as you. When I was younger, when I was very little, I think I want to be a marine biologist. So my idea was to do what you guys are doing. And then a teacher at school told me I thought I could go and study marine biology and just do sharks. I didn't want to do seahorses, I didn't want to do sea cucumbers or dolphins. I just wanted to do sharks, that's it. As children, they like doing that. And then a teacher at school said, no, you will have to learn about coral and all. And I was like, oh, I don't want to learn about coral, I want to do sharks. So I decided against doing marine biology, which is probably a mistake in later years. So what I did was I taught myself about sharks through books, through documentaries, and those kind of things. And when I was younger, when I was a child, there's very, very famous people who work with sharks called Ron and Valerie Taylor. If you've heard, Australian couple, very, very, very famous. I would write to Ron and Valerie Taylor and say, how do I have a job where I can go on adventures around the world filming sharks like you do? And I'm from Manchester in England. I don't know if you've ever been to Manchester, but there's no sharks in Manchester. I'm not a rich man, I'm a very poor man. So it's very, very difficult. So when I found the money, which is when I couldn't be a musician anymore, because you don't make money being a musician, unfortunately, I got a real job where I work with lawyers. So a headhunter, you know, where you work at one company and he owns another company and he wants someone like you to work there. So I approach you and try and convince you to go and work at his company. Does that make sense? I did that with lawyers. I was boring. 3 years, suit and tie, didn't like it. But it paid for me to be able to go to the Bahamas, to go to Egypt, to go and dive with sharks. The idea always being that I was going to one day become the guy who makes films about sharks and people. So my background and my trajectory, as you put it, which is a good word to use, to here, I wouldn't recommend it. You're doing it a lot better than I did it. I just had the ambition and wanted it enough. So I made myself homeless, gave up my job, everything. No personal life, very, very lonely, and just committed on going to make this one film. And then this film gives me the option to make another film, and another film, and another film, and another film. So the way you're doing it, and actually studying in a university and getting the opportunities that brings, you're doing it the right way. Don't think you can make films about sharks by being in a heavy metal band for 10 years. It's not the normal way of doing it. So yeah, so it's an unusual story. Mine, it is very unusual. But when I was a small child, when I was 12 or 13, because I was maybe unusually well informed, I had access to shark biologists and people who worked with sharks, who, when I would speak with them, and in those days it was letters, no email. So you'd send a letter and then 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you wait, you get a reply, and then send another one, and 4 weeks. They seemed to think that maybe I had something to offer, so would invite me to, so I wrote articles for magazines when I was 13 or 14. I got involved in what used to be, it was something called the European Shark Research Bureau, which is one of the first shark research organisations in Europe, maybe the first, although on that, sadly it doesn't exist any longer, but they invited me to be a part of that at 15. So my journey, instead of going from here to here, my journey's gone like this, but I've kind of ended up in the right place. So it's an unusual way of doing it, I think.
Si no hay más preguntas, aquí acaba la charla. Gracias a todos por venir y un aplauso para David.